Last year, BMW gave its favorite child, the 3 Series, a new set of clothes, and now it's time for its sibling, the GT, to get its fair share of nips and tucks. But will that be enough to give it a better acceptance in the market? Let's find out.
The 3 Series sedan has been the lean and the sexy one in the family, whereas the 3 GT took shape as the taller, wider and the plumper one. And maybe that is the reason why she hasn't got as much love as her attention-grabbing twin. But she hopes to change it now with a facelift. While their outfits aren't the same, the GT wears similar accessories and makeup as the sedan. Hook-shaped eyeliners, more defined eyebrows, chrome accents, a darker shade of red on the new taillights, and some new footwear. 18 inches though, unlike the 16s on the sedan. The petrol variant proudly dons the illustrious 330i badge, whereas the more popular diesel only wears the GT emblem, wanting you to treat her as a smaller 5 GT than a roomier 3 Series sedan. And that intent is highlighted further when you step inside the cabin. The rear seat has a 5 Series rivaling legroom. Under-thigh support could have been better though, and the coupe-ish roofline does rob a bit of the headroom if you are a tall person. It does pack in a lot of boot space, but the compulsory spare wheel eats into quite a bit of that space despite this being a space saver. The rear seats have a 40-10-40 split that helps maximize cargo space if you aren't traveling full house. At the front of the cabin is a clean-looking dashboard with its driver-centric design. It now houses a larger stick-out type display for the iDrive infotainment system. The GT's also installed the latest software for this system, which gets faster menus and crisper graphics similar to the setup in the 7 Series, sans the gesture controls. The user interface is new too and gets a multi-window layout, but I personally like the older interface with the cascading windows. It comes with a 20 GB storage for maps and audio files and is mated to a 9-speaker setup, but the audio quality is relatively average as compared to its peers.
So, first things first, I have a few grudges against this car which I'm going to get out of my way. First, no window blinds, which is a bit of a problem when you're touring in maybe the summers, have a lot of heat, you have a lot of sun glare coming into the cabin, and there's no way to cut it out because even window tinting is not allowed in the country. 2. Heads-up display. Come on BMW, it was your thing, how could you omit that on the GT? When I'm doing long distances, I don't want to be taking my eyes off the road often to look at the maps or to look at the speed. A heads-up display certainly would have helped. Number 3, you have anti-dazzle or anti-glare on the inside rearview mirror. You have it on the outside rearview mirror on the right-hand side, but not on the left-hand side, which again is a bit of a problem when you're driving in city or even on the highways, because most idiots on the roads these days want to drive with their high beams running on at all times. And number 4, there is no reclining function on the rear seats, and even the seat back is quite flat. It lacks a good comfortable contouring. Now, I spent about 3 to 4 hours in the back seat and I couldn't take it anymore. I wanted to be back in the driver's seat. This is a lot more accommodating, a lot more comfortable. Now, if you're the type who is chauffeur driven around in city traffic through the week, and it's only over the weekends when you take the car out yourself, you get behind the wheel, fine, the GT works brilliantly well in that sense. But if you are going to be chauffeur driven around all the time and even being driven around on your road trips, then you might have to look elsewhere for better options.
All these are small things but can make a big difference when you go touring long distances, something that the GT claims is its forte.
Now the good bits. We begin with the ride quality, simply superb. Now, despite having a space saver in the boot, BMW still given the GT a set of run flat shoes, but compared to the other run flats that we've had on the older BMWs, surprisingly the ride is not jarring at all.
Sharp bumps need to be tackled slow and steady though. I was concerned about the rims when I went out touring on some of the broken B roads in Maharashtra, but the GT came out unaffected. The stiff sidewall of the tires is not only effective when tackling sharp edges or potholes, but also helps protect the rim to an extent. Hit a deep pothole hard, however, and these too could suffer a cut. It happened to us in one of our previous tests. Contributing further to the uber comfortable ride quality is the suspension setup, which comprises of a piling setup at the rear and aluminum double joint spring struts at the front.
The suspension has been tuned more towards comfort than dynamism, and that makes this car a little squishy for the badge that it wears. But that necessarily isn't a bad thing, because it just manages to glide over undulations, take on the potholes quite well for a luxury car, which is something that really works for us here in India. Even with a full house, the ride quality isn't compromised much.
While its suspension components are similar to the 3 Series sedan, the GT sits on a 25mm taller ground clearance for better bump absorption and 110mm longer wheelbase for more cabin space.
So don't expect the GT to be a roomier 3 Series with the same level of dynamism. It doesn't have it. The squishy nature in fact takes a toll on its cornering capabilities. Unlike the 3 Series, this doesn't remain flat. When you're tackling bends, you will notice there is a fair amount of vertical movement. Also, load up the boot with all your luggage and it does tend to get a little bouncy in here.
That said, it has a 50-50 front to rear weight distribution like its sedan sibling, so nosedive isn't a worry. Get used to the body roll and the handling dynamics become quite predictable too. But what could have done with a bit more predictability though are the brakes, especially on the diesel variant.
The brakes lack feel. They have enough bite, but there is no feel, and that has been my complaint with most recent BMWs. The brakes on this particular car, they feel a bit spongy, which needs you to give it a firm push when you are wanting to drop the anchor at highway speeds. Around city, it's fine, it's not a big hassle at all, but it's only on the highway speeds or when you're tackling bends with a full house that the brakes do tend to get a little unnerving.
The GT has one of the best steering setups in the lower range of BMWs. The electromechanical setup is convenient for city use with a light operation, while a slightly heavier setup can be chosen when you decide to have some fun around twisties. Since power is fed purely to the rear wheels, the GT feels nimble and sure-footed.
Moving on to the engines, the diesel, it will be the more popular and the ideal choice given the GT's touring intentions. It's a 2-litre unit, it replaces the older 2-litre motor now. It's the same engine that you get on most recent BMWs. It's more refined and also more responsive.
The motor is quite silent for a diesel and it's tuned very similar to the sedan, providing torque from as low as 1750 RPM to help you lug around 4 occupants and the luggage without the engine ever feeling out of breath. The 8-speed ZF transmission that it is mated to feeds power and torque to the rear-wheel drive setup in a linear fashion.
The 8-speed ZF transmission, it's slick, it's impressive, whether you leave it in automatic mode or take the control in your own hands with the paddle shifters. But what driving mode you choose makes a lot of difference to the way this gearbox behaves. You get the usual suspects, you have the Eco Pro mode, the Comfort, the Sport and the Sport Plus mode. Now, the Eco Pro is ideally suited for city use, where it will dull down the throttle and the gearbox response in favor of better fuel economy. Use this mode on the highway and you might maximize the range. However, it comes at a cost. You will also notice that pulling overtakes does need a bit of planning because of the dulled throttle response, and engine braking isn't as effective either because the gearbox will take its own sweet time to downshift and drop speeds.
Comfort mode is better suited for the highway runs with its linear power delivery and better engine response. But if you want to hit the winding roads and want sharp responses from your engine and gearbox, the Sport and the Sport Plus modes will ensure that you come out of every curve with a smile on your face. The only downer again, however, is the suspension, which remains soft no matter what driving mode you choose.
An adaptive suspension could have helped. It could have given you a cushy ride when you're using any of these city bias modes, or given you a flatter ride when you want to tackle the bends and have some fun. And that's one of the reasons why I will not recommend the 3GT in its petrol variant.
Which is a bummer, because the petrol actually brings back the 330i badge, which has had an illustrious history in the 3 Series family, pointing towards a lovely 6-cylinder motor under the hood.
In the GT, however, the 330i badge is associated with a 2-litre 4-cylinder engine. It's not a slow engine by any means. It can hit the turn from standstill in about 6.5 seconds. It also packs in the same amount of power as the outgoing 6-cylinder motor, but it lacks the punch, it lacks the emotion-stirring soundtrack of that good old straight six.
It is a turbocharged engine and therefore only needs to rev to about 5200 rpm to give you an instantaneous supply of power the moment you step on the throttle. Even when in the dull Eco Pro mode, the GT petrol picks up pace quite quickly. There's also enough torque low down the range to ensure easy pulling and in turn extracting quite a decent fuel economy than what the power output would otherwise suggest. But the rest of the car just doesn't do justice to this fun motor. Instead, it's the diesel that gels better with the GT's intentions and would be the ideal drivetrain to go with in my books.
So if you think about it, the 3GT doesn't really have any competition coming from the German brands. Its only competition comes from within the house, from the 3 Series sedan, which is only focused at giving you the best possible driving fun in that particular price bracket. And the other is the X3, which is a more practical alternative. It's a crossover, it's an SUV or a sports activity vehicle as BMW likes to call it. Gives you better cargo space, better ground clearance, and also more comfortable seating. The GT then achieves a middle ground, where it gives you most of the practical elements that the X3 has to offer, while giving you a very car-like driving feel that a 3 Series sedan ideally would. And that is what makes it so practical and quite a tempting option to buy. Whether or not it works for you when you're buying into a BMW badge, that's completely up to you.